Well, greetings, one and all. This is Radical Raw with Radikal Solutions. And on this episode, this is a super special episode. We're going to touch on the subject of reparations. And I know for a lot of people, they're still not clear on what exactly it is. So I've decided to bring forward an expert on the subject by the name of Esther Stanford-Xosei. And we're going to touch on the various aspects of reparation and hopefully give you an insight of what it's about and how you can take part, play your role, and various issues surrounding that. So greetings.
Greetings.
Okay, how are you doing today?
I'm really great, I'm doing fine.
All right, it's really a pleasure to have you as a guest on the Radikal Solutions Podcast, because you're someone that I've known for a long time, and I've seen you do, some amazing work in terms of waking up our people to a lot of different situations that we're in, and you're very active, and I'm like honored to have you here as a guest on my show. All right, I think you're the most important guest I've ever had so far.
Oh wow, so flattering me.
I'm keeping it real, man. And it's real. So,
yeah, we do go back a long way, so it's nice to be on your show, to be invited to be on the Radikal Solutions show. Thank you.
All right, so I did all start with you in terms of this movement.
Okay, so I'm a reparationist, which is a reparations scholar, activist, campaigner, and I have been a reparationist for 20 plus years, 21 years, and I started out on this journey as somebody who was, as a legal practitioner, when I was working for an organization of Black lawyers, and was becoming very aware of the movement in the United States of America for reparations for our people. And as a lawyer, an emerging, lawyer, in terms of non-practicing, but I wanted to use my legal education and training and knowledge to help uplift my people, which is the whole reason why I wanted to become a lawyer and I studied law. It was to be able to use law as a tool of empowerment, because it's often, misused against us. So anyhow, when I was working for this organization of Black lawyers, I discovered the movement in the US, and I connected with the movement there because I wasn't aware of any movement in the UK at that time, not really. And it was in the process of connecting with people in the US that I then got to discover that there was actually a movement here. It kind of worked the wrong way around.
Yeah.
And that's how it started for me. I took myself to America to speak at a conference at a university in America that was a reparations education and mobilization conference that was, organized there. And the rest is history. It was when I went to America that I met leading people in the movement and so forth.
Interesting. So, I mean, in terms of that, what was happening at that time, I remember people like Al Sharpton was saying things like, we've still got the 40 acres and a mule thing to deal with, how relevant was that argument?
Well, that argument, I guess, was relevant, but knowing what I know now and what I kind of discovered very early on in my education as a reparationist was the 40 acres and a mule were promised. So it was meant to be actually 2 mules, apparently, was promised to our people as part of, if you like, an emancipation settlement. Okay. But that never happened. But then actually, if we look at the situation of people of African heritage in America, that land is stolen land, it's captured land, as Chronic sings about. And so the notion of colonizers, European colonizers that settled America, dispossessed the indigenous peoples of America, then saying, well, this is our land, we don't recognize you as people. We have this, we're going to enforce something known as the doctrine of discovery, meaning that this was empty land, terra nullius, you didn't exist, we own the land, and therefore the claim that then African people, and let's be very clear, African people peopled the planet, I get that, but in terms of our recent history or sojourn in the diaspora, from the 1400s, a lot of us came into the diaspora via trafficking, notwithstanding that we had, circumnavigated the globe and explored all over the place, but we're really talking about specific instances. And so the notion of us then thinking that it was, if you like, ethical to be able to receive lands as a way of settlement or some type of redress for the chattelization of African people in the so-called Americas is obviously problematic, especially when we recognize that indigenous peoples, whether they are melanated or they are of lighter hue, have never given up their sovereignty, their claims on the land. And so I believe that we have to look again at what it is we consider to be a just settlement or remedy. And of course, there have been various movements. One of the more famous ones that I had some connection with via the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, known as NCOBRA, was a formation, a movement, a radical movement called the Republic of New Africa. And it was founded by a lot of really, well-known revolutionaries. And they were arguing that 5 states in the so-called United States of America should be ceded to people of African heritage as a just, if you like, compensation for the fact that we had worked the land, we had, helped develop so-called United States of America. So there's a whole range of experiences that our people had in those lands, but that 40 acres and a mule was never a promise that was made tangible. Yeah. But at the same time, we have to look at that in the context of the struggle of indigenous peoples of America also for reparations. A big part of their claim was, we want our land back. We want settlers off this land and to restore our own sovereignty.
Yeah. So that is definitely not an approach. So, okay, in terms of basic definitions, when somebody asks you what is reparations, how do you respond?
So that's a really good question, because in public discourse, a lot of the time you'll hear language like, oh, we're owed reparations, or when are we going to get our reparations, or should so-and-so Britain or America who pay reparations. So reparations is always reduced in public discourse and in the so-called mass media to being a payment, an exchange of property or money or some other type of resource. But actually, the word reparations comes from reparer, and it means to really make repair. And in the Old English, the word reparation also spoke to the people or group or even thing that had been harmed, that had been damaged. A reparation was about transforming that entity which had experienced harm, loss, or damage, including violations in a peoplehood sense of a group's not only human rights, individual human rights, but their collective or people's rights, or rights to self-determination or sovereignty and so forth. So actually, if we take that basic common sense understanding of reparation being about repair, in the international social movement for African reparations, as it is referred to by some of us who are scholar activists and who are involved in building or maintaining that movement in these times, we recognize two main frameworks. And they're not really definitions, but we say frameworks. So there's a conceptual framework, which is advanced by somebody called Professor Chinwezu, a Nigerian public intellectual, and he has the repairs framework. People may have heard of this definition, framework, as I said, it's not a definition, but he talks about money is not even 1% of what reparation is about. So no denying that there is money involved, but it's whatever that is, it's 1% of what reparation is about. Reparation is mostly about making repairs, self-made repairs on ourselves, mental repairs, psychological repairs, cultural repairs, organizational repairs, social repairs, institutional repairs, technological repairs, economic repairs, political repairs, and educational repairs. Repairs of every type that we need in order to recreate and sustain Black societies. Okay? So that is the operational framework. And he goes on to say that more important than any money to be received, or more fundamental than any lands to be recovered, is the opportunity that the reparations campaign offers us for the rehabilitation of Black people, by Black people, for Black people. Opportunities for the rehabilitation of our minds, our material condition, our collective reputation, our cultures, our memories, our self-respect, our religious and political traditions, and our family institutions. But first and foremost, for the rehabilitation of our minds. The most important part of reparation is our self-repair, the change it will bring about in our understanding of our history, of ourselves, and of our destiny, the change it will bring about in our place in the world. So clearly, that for me is like the comprehensive foundation framework, okay? And then there is, as much as the conceptual is good, it's the big picture stuff. So then we have to look at how do we operationalize reparations. And there is the United Nations guidelines and principles on a right to a remedy and reparation. And this basically codifies a lot of the norms around reparations that have been evolving over centuries, and that now comes to be, overstood to be international law. And the UN guidelines and principles on the right to a remedy and reparations emphasize that there are 5 key principles that should be embraced in a holistic reparations process, program, initiative, settlement. And these include what's called a cessation of violations, so basically stopping the harm. Whatever's going on, and let's just take racism, anti-Black racism, and its specific form that impacts on people of African heritage known as Afrophobia. Stopping a world without racism, anti-Black racism, its specific type of Afrophobia, that would be stopping a harm, okay? And so cessation of violations, assurances, which means how do we know that what's happening is not going to happen again, and then guarantees of non-repetition, which is a world where what has happened to us which is a multitude of crimes and violations of our rights and our dignity and our standing, in the world. How do we ensure that we create a world system where it never happens again? And there's a term that some of us use. Some of our people use the term maafa, Kiswahili term, meaning the great disaster, to speak to oftentimes the chattel enslavement process historically. But part of the repair is also what's known as cognitive justice, to do with our cognition and linguistic repairs. So actually within Kiswahili, there's a term called maangamizi, which really speaks to an annihilation of a people, a genocide, okay, an intentional attempt to destroy a people in whole or in part, which is part of the definition of genocide in the 1948 Genocide Convention. So we prefer to use, some of us, not speaking for everybody, the term maangamizi, and it's certainly, I think, become part of the popular lexicon in African heritage communities in Britain. And the maangamizi speaks to a continuum of historic chattel enslavement, colonization, and neo-colonialism today, including the most serious crimes in international law, which are crimes against humanity, genocide, which I've already mentioned, war crimes, crimes of oppression, of aggression, as they're called. And there is now a big campaign to have a fifth crime recognized, which is the crime of ecocide, the destruction of ecosystems and our environment that sustain all human life, our food systems, everything, has to function through a healthy environment. So yes, that is really what the UN framework talks to. So the first principle, remember I said there were 5, and I've only mentioned one, which is really stop the harm, and then let's ensure that we can have guarantees of non-repetition. One of the principles is compensation, which most people reduce reparations to, but compensation comes down the line of, if you like, other remedies. Because if you don't institute other remedies, you will never ever be able to enforce a just compensation settlement, because you will lack the power. What comes before compensation is restitution, which is a remedy that is about attempting to undo all of the impacts of a particular historical or contemporary injustice. So imagine a world where there was no enslavement of our people ever. What would that world be if we were in our home, if we had access to our resources, if we hadn't literally had people try and not only physically cut off our limbs and all kinds of things, but, metaphysically, metaphorically do that, try and stunt our growth and development and evolution as a human, reality. So
let me say, we've seen one possible thing way it could have been Wakanda.
Right. So Black Panther and the notion of Wakanda did give, if you like, for a lot of our people who perhaps are not used to envisioning a world different to the one that we've got, it did, as we know. Sure, there were some people who had critiques of it, but for a lot of our people, it did a lot to uplift them, because they were not used to seeing African people and Africa, parts of our homeland, depicted in particular ways. So that's the restitution. It also includes the notion of returning to us everything that has been taken, returning to us our citizenship, our identities, our wealth, our true wealth and resources, which are not money. You cannot reduce wealth to money. Real estate,
that we hold sacred and
absolutely. All our sacred, hallowed property, cultural property, our spiritual, that are part of our ceremonies that are often encased in European museums. And actually, for some people, these are not just objects. These represent parts of a community's identity. Okay, so that's the restitution. It also includes restitution of our rights as human beings, because part of the experience of chattelization was in certain jurisdictions reducing us to being 3/5 of a human being. And the mere fact that even in the UK we didn't have so-called Race Relations Acts until the 1960s tells us that it wasn't really until the 1960s that on paper we were supposed to have formal legal equality with so-called Caucasian people and other people in this country. Another remedy under reparations in terms of international law. So remember, I've mentioned guarantees of no repetition, I've mentioned compensation, I've mentioned restitution. There are two more. Satisfaction, which are often referred to as symbolic reparations. So that might include taking down statues of colonizers and genocidaires and, horrible people that have done terrible things to us. We shouldn't have to kind of celebrate these people when they are violators of human rights and collective rights. It might also include putting up other statues of our freedom fighters that are important for our own psyche, our own healing, this sense of our liberators, many of whom were classified as being enemies of state, even terrorists. Yeah. But yet, years later, it's like they have been rehabilitated in public memory. So people, if we just take a recent example of Nelson Mandela, was once considered a terrorist by the British government, okay? And then now a lot of the same people all over him. I know he's passed, but they like to hold him up as some model because of reconciliation and things like that. So that's satisfaction. It might also include changing the curriculum, changing street names, rewriting the national history. And the last one, but I haven't said them in a particular order, is rehabilitation. Very important. So rehabilitation is really all those measures that a community, a people, put in place to rehabilitate themselves, so to strengthen their families, strengthen communities, address intra-community tensions. And we know that as a result of our sojourn and divide and rule, we have issues amongst us, even within if you are born in a particular country, let's just say in the Caribbean or Africa, or even a certain country in Europe or so-called Americas, then there's a lot of, issues within people who supposedly carry the same identity, let alone when we now are all in the mix and we're all coming with different identities and speaking different languages and call ourselves different things. So building that unity within the group and across our groups, okay? As one people, access to family strengthening support, access to sorry?
Let me just say something there. Sorry to break your flow. I just want to bring it home to where I'm at, because it was only just the weekend gone that all 7 of us brothers met for the first time. We all have the same father. It was the first time we met.
Right, really?
This is what you're talking about, repairing.
That is exactly what I'm talking about. So all of the stuff, and sometimes everybody gets on really well. Sometimes there's issues. Yeah, because somebody was left with one parent or another, and somebody else felt they were left behind or was somewhere else, or they felt they had less opportunities. So sometimes that causes isms and schisms, tensions within families. And imagine now being the fact that not only have you been able to reconcile with your direct immediate family, but what about the extended family members who are all across the world?
Yeah.
So it also includes access to legal support and services, access to health care. So then there are particular health conditions that disproportionately impact on our people, a lot of the time as a result of historic oppression, environmental factors, lack of access to particular services that we require for our own special needs, and many such other things. Okay, access to psychological assistance in terms of healing, the psychological repair, the mental health repairs, because we know that a lot of our people end up being disproportionately diagnosed with some kind of mental health classification or diagnosis, as it were. And so rehabilitation would speak to developing culturally competent institutions of healthcare and other social welfare provision that we need, because actually we have been deprived of resources, deprived of our inheritance. We've been dispossessed of land, and land is essential to a group's identity and its sense of belonging somewhere and being rooted. Okay, and a lot of that has been interfered with. It's not been totally destroyed, but that whole process that we've gone through is actually genocide. And genocide doesn't mean that you just kill off all the people and none of them exist. Actually, a lot of the time when genocide occurs, the people are not totally exterminated, but what you become or what you're left with is a fragment of who you should be. Okay,
identity.
Identity is so key here.
Yeah, it's interesting because I went through a phase where I had to question myself: who am I? Where really do I belong? All of these type of fundamental questions, and I wonder sometimes, it must be complex even for other people of like mixed, what they call mixed races and all these type of things. You should have an identity. It's a grounding. It's like, it's essential.
Absolutely. So the right to an identity, the right to a nationality that is not actually based on Europe and European colonization of our foreparents is part of the repair. I mean, many of us now hold these passports or what have you that are really the property, make us still the property of imperial nations like Britain, which had an empire that spanned 3/4 of planet Earth. So that's reparations in terms of its meaning. And so as you can see, just from the little overview that I've given, which by the way is just scratching the surface, it is huge.
That's a big.
It is a big thing. So it is really problematic when our people just reduce reparations, which is a whole range of measures to actually try and make the group whole again, to just being about money in today's value, which actually we know that money in the modern sense of what we use it is a very recent thing. It's only a few hundred years old.
Okay. So that could never be the solution. Yeah. There's a whole different aspects to it. Okay, so all right, so we've got that kind of clarified now. It's not just a simple thing. But there are
about making repairs. And the repairs, let me say it very simply to top it, to round it up. Repairs, but there's the notion of internal repairs or self-repairs. Some people say self-reparations, but what that means is, I'd say, what we owe each other, what we owe self, what we owe people within our family and our extended family, our community, our nation, and our people group. But then there's the notion of external repairs, which is what people would say is what others owe us in terms of accountability. So governments, corporations, institutions, the landed gentry or so-called aristocracy, the church, the Roman Catholic Church, the Church of England, other religious kind of denominations in terms of their own role and complicity in the subjugation, the dispossession, the enslavement, the trafficking, the kidnapping, of our people.
So my thing is, when you go to these people, because this is external now, and you start to talk to them about these things, what I'm seeing from watching a few different interviews, and seems to be the playing down of the importance of our issue. You know, they would go on about what the Nazis did to the Jews, or even the 9/11, and say, remember this, you know. But when it comes to our plight, it's that was long ago and stuff like that.
Yes, because in the psyche of many people, including some of our own people, we are still considered to be less than human.
We don't value ourselves enough. This is part of the thing, in the way we see ourselves. Because it was interesting, even just when we said, imagine what it would be like, what we would be like if we wasn't tampered with in this way and messed around and all these things. The potential that we have and the greatness that we have is like, so I'm like, okay, suppose there's a youngster listening now with some ambitions to be a politician.
Okay.
What could we instill in their minds to say the changes that are needed, that can be done in terms of where we have some power?
So for me, this really is an important question, because for a lot of our young people that who are born here, they don't necessarily, a lot of them don't have a sense of home being somewhere else. And so this is a society that they may want to stay in for a long time. And we need to be thinking about how do we survive, but not only survive in this society, but try and make it in this society so that we can, reach our full potential, which I don't believe we fully can in this society. But anyhow, what I would say to such young persons, because it's actually a live question for me, because I am working with young people who are interested in politics, in electoral politics, because we do community politics. Okay. And what we're encouraging them is to understand the notion of what's called substantive representation. Now, because I'm asserting an African identity, okay, now born here, just to clarify, I'm born here. My parents were born, one in the Caribbean, one in South America, and origins, I know directly Africa, okay? But I claim an African identity, despite all of that. So there is a difference. So I would talk about substantive African representation. And there is a difference between just having, if you like, somebody who would be seen as a black politician because they're melanated in terms of hue, complexion, or what have you. But that's about it. They just have the skin color, the association, maybe through history or family connections. But in terms of their liberty, in terms of their mindset, in terms of their value system, in terms of their aspirations and goals, it's really European, okay? Because a lot of us have been socialized to be everything but ourselves. So we can't, it's not enough to have just what's called descriptive representation, meaning people from our group on the outside, but on the inside there's somebody else. What we actually need is substantive African representation, which means that you have people who think with particular ideas that are free, they're sovereign, they're ideas that come from their people, and ideas that remember that we have been so much more than what our passport tells us, if we have a passport, because some of our people don't. But whatever this sense of narrow nationality is, that we're so much more than that. So it's about having a right to be represented according to the cultural traditions, mores, standards, ethical guidelines and principles of one's community, going back now hundreds of years, centuries even. Okay,
Yeah.
so I try and make younger people understand the importance of them not just being providing descriptive representation, but actually providing substantive representation for our people. The other thing that I would make them aware of is, as a reparationist, I'm involved with a forum in London called GARFOL, the Global African Reparations Forum of London, which is promoting a campaign called TARV, T-A-R-V, the African Reparations Vote. And what we're saying is, whatever your political persuasion, if you choose to become an independent elected official, MP or local councillor, or if you are part of any of the so-called mainstream British political parties, that we are not going to vote for you. Our community are not going to vote for you unless you actually plead our cause, because that's how other groups organize in Britain. Okay.
Yeah.
They organize together collectively, and they make sure certain of their people get in, and then they hold that person to account in various ways. And because they've got community institutions outside of the mainstream ones, they can do that. We're not so good at doing that because we're losing a lot of our community institutions, community buildings, community spaces. And so therefore, even the notion of being a community and having those internal mechanisms of accountability are disappearing fast.
Yeah.
But that's what we have to rebuild. Part of the repair is community repairs. We have to rebuild community, however we define it, however we see people around us. And we know that we are communities within communities, but whatever it is, we have to be about building the community, because that's part of building our strength, rebuilding our power base, an economic power base as well, so that when we decide, well, we're boycotting certain things, or no, we're going to provide for ourselves, we're going to grow our own food, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, then that is part of becoming a free people again, a sovereign people again.
And I'm going to bring it to my situation again in terms of community, and you mentioned food. I was on Sunday at the community garden, just volunteering. And it's a beautiful experience. But what I did hear the sister who organized it saying, our first open day, we had like 30 people, over 30 people. Now today is like a handful of people. So it's like, okay, maybe the people were inspired at first when they heard the idea, but to keep that momentum is another effort again.
That is so hard, because we live in a society that is really promoting the cult of the individual.
It's a shame.
And actually saying you can be more, have more money, you can be more famous, you can have more if you do it alone, if you don't share. And we come from collective cultures that was about sharing, that was about all in common, that was not about elevating one over the other in terms of the root of many of our societies. Okay?
Hey, I actually spoke to my mom about the community garden. She said, listen, what we used to do as a community is go around to individual gardens when it was planting time. We didn't have to pay external people to come in and pay them wages. We just helped other build each other's farm.
That's right.
Corporate.
And a lot of that has gone now, because farming, agriculture, getting, literally your hands soiled by the earth, connecting with earth, has become, it's not popularized. It's not seen as being successful. And so that is part of the miseducation, that we're taught to look for success in actually concrete buildings and in industries that are responsible for despoiling the earth, polluting the environment, killing us. And a lot of the time we live in areas where the air quality is poor. A lot of our children and other people experience all kinds of respiratory conditions. Environmental racism is rife. So we have to kind of redesign the whole way we inhabit space. Whatever space that we are occupying and that we have sought to make home and establish family upon, and community and extended networks. We have to rethink that.
Yeah, man, that structure needs to be in place. All right, there's a couple of subjects. We're kind of short on time here, but couple of things that I am not fully up to speed with. You can touch on Extinction Rebellion. It sounds interesting. What is that about?
So, okay, Extinction Rebellion is a movement that was initiated by Caucasian people in the UK, in particular in Stroud, who came together in say 2018 and decided that as environmentalists, a lot of them, okay, and global justice activists, and was saying, look, we're in the process of a climate and ecological crisis or emergency. Governments are failing to act. Governments in the West in particular are failing to act, and that the model of so-called development that we are following is actually resulting in destruction of lives and also the environment. And so they formed this movement out of a campaign that was led by a group called Rising Up. And the idea of Extinction Rebellion was that they had to rebel against extinction of people and planet, or so-called Mother Earth. And so you probably do know of them, but maybe didn't know that that was their name. Extinction Rebellion have been known for blocking roads and doing sort of theatrical protests that are drawing attention to the climate and ecological crisis, and trying to force governments around the world to take actions to implement their international agreements under what's called stuff such as the Paris Agreement, which is about keeping global warming to less than 1.5 degrees, because anything beyond that is going to result in much more loss of life, genocide and ecocide for many people around the world, especially in the global south. And many of our people who were born in the Caribbean, if we know that there's just recently been a hurricane that started in Barbados, touched on Jamaica, Cuba and other places. Hurricanes, and this was the first hurricane that touched in Barbados for 65 years. When there was a hurricane a couple of years ago that almost flattened Antigua and Barbuda, literally the whole island had to be evacuated, the whole population. So these small island nation states where we have been trafficked to as a result of chattel enslavement have become homes that are very vulnerable. The sea is rising, the coastlines are disappearing. And so imagine people have made these homes now for centuries, but they're in danger of disappearing. And if global warming, there's a campaign in the Caribbean, 1.5 to stay alive. If global warming goes to 2-3%, and it's actually projected to go, it's 3%, going up to 4% by the end of this century, that what we will be talking about is a massive depopulation of the planet. More cyclones, more erratic weather, people will just disappear. And those companies, a lot of the corporations that are responsible for fossil fuel production and extraction they know the damage that the oil industry is doing. They know the damage of extractivism, all this mining and digging out all the minerals of the earth. They knew from the 50s. And actually it's about, less than 100 companies around the world that are really responsible for all of this in terms of the massive scale of the climate and ecological crisis and biodiversity loss. So we're losing a lot of biodiversity, a lot of animal and plant species that are essential for keeping the earth in balance.
All right, there's a common factor here. A lot of these problems, and even the problems that we've been through as a people, stem from greed.
Yes.
That element that is there with that. Okay, another subject is the upcoming African Liberation Day, 1st of August. Is there anything?
Yeah.
So
I think
just it's been going now. And
so I will contextualize, I will answer that, but just to finish it, because people might think, well, why are we talking about Extinction Rebellion? Extinction Rebellion are one of the groups that have been supporting our people's struggle for reparations.
Right.
Because they are also involved in challenging their governments, okay, and saying, we want to live. Your way of life is a death style, not a lifestyle. And we're concerned about, they're obviously concerned about what they have built up, and they are interested in intergenerational wealth transmission, and they don't want to lose what they've acquired, okay? So that's the connection. So I'm actually part of a group co-founded with XR, that's their acronym, XR co-founders, and it's called the Extinction Rebellion Internationalist Solidarity Network, that was co-founded by the Stop the Ma'angamizi We Charge Genocide Ecocide campaign, which is a reparations campaign that partners with the African Emancipation Day Reparations March Committee, which has been organising an African Emancipation Day Reparations March in between the year 2015 and 2019. And last year, the notion of a march was upgraded to a reparations rebellion grounding. So the idea that we need to ground with our people about the need for us to rebel against the status quo if we are truly to effect and secure holistic reparations, because it's not coming because we we plead to them, or we take out lawsuits, or we try and appeal to some type of moral conscience. No, they have the power to deny our right to be heard, to deny our right to enforce reparations. And so it is going to take rebellion. And rebellion is not a term that people should be afraid of, because every bit of progress that we've ever made from the time that we were kidnapped from our homeland, made prisoners of war, trafficked into the diaspora, was won because we rebelled. We didn't accept the status quo, and we actually tried to reassert our own vision of the world, our own systems of governance, and what we know as law in terms of what was just and what was unjust.
That's a law, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, so it's a combination of organizations putting on African Day, and you're saying it's now changed from a march to a stand.
Yes, and because what we're trying to say to our people is we have to prepare for rebellion. Yeah, and rebellion is about not complying with the system as it is. So rebellion is not just condemning the old or what you're against. Rebellion is about building the new.
All right.
It's about asserting what you're for. So building ourselves into a formidable force where we begin to live the new world, the repaired world. We begin to model that in our own personal lives, our own families, our own communities. We begin to be the change that we wish to see, because nobody's going to come and do it for us.
No, we are responsible for that. So, okay. Just to highlight, are there any special features on this coming?
Yes, so these rebellion groundings is about facilitating groundings, which was popularized by the great Dr. Walter Rodney, who grounded with our people, even though he was an establishment academic with a doctorate. He went out into the so-called ghettos, the real grassroots areas, grounded with Rasta, all of those who in the Caribbean in particular were seen as social outcasts, but who had more advanced knowledge than the so-called educated or miseducated elites, okay, who had been miseducated out of their own selfhood to become, literally bigging up everything that was about our colonizers. And people like Walter Rodney knew that on the societies in the Caribbean and around the world couldn't be transformed unless the most oppressed in society actually had a stake in actually reshaping those societies. And for that, He was made persona non grata. He lost his job at the University of the West Indies. He had to leave Jamaica, and he was eventually assassinated by the government of Guyana because of his radical politics that were about social transformation, redistribution of the wealth for the people.
Yeah, power to the people. So obviously the educational institutions didn't.
So so the day is focused on education, discussion, like an in-gathering. We need to talk these things through. We need to look at how do we prepare? How do we hold elected officials to account? How do we hold the British government to account? How do we stop them from dropping bombs on our home countries and looting our resources via their multinational corporations? These are some of the discussions that we will be having. So the day features edutainment, it features a rally with speeches from all around the world. It features a people's assembly where our people are discussing issues together, not just being talked at. It features, we're going to have a provisional session of an international people's tribunal that we're developing, where we are going to model what it means to put Priti Patel and the UK government on trial, because our people need to rehearse, they need to get accustomed to putting themselves in the position of being the lawmakers and the ones who are now going to take the responsibility for governing themselves, okay, and governing the wider society in the space that they occupy and choose to call or make a home.
Yeah, some of these things take a kind of revolution of the mind, because a lot of us haven't been even aware of the power that we have, and the knowledge, or even just basic fundamental understanding that we have that power. Because I'm learning now how we can create money. You know what I'm saying? And one of the things you touched on, the constant stealing of our resources is keeping, on a holistic African level, keeping our people in poverty. On the motherland, there's all those minerals, rich minerals, and the people are hungry.
Yeah.
So one of the things I've been thinking is it just takes that mindset, and for the leaders who are in positions to make decisions, to have that understanding that we have the resources that we're giving away, or somehow is being, taken in and being exploited. Basically, it's being exploited, and if they can see that by having the resources, you can also control the resources when you take control. Because how can it be you got your minerals in your back garden and you're allowing someone to take it and then tell you how much they're going to pay for it? That don't make
absolutely.
You should be in a position to say, nothing ain't leaving here unless you pay me what it's worth.
Absolutely. And our people have been disempowered. Okay, and a lot of that disempowerment is because we have been dispossessed. So there is a false assumption that we make that, okay, those of us that were taken into the diaspora, trafficked into the diaspora, we had it so bad, and everyone who stayed behind was somehow okay. That's not the case. Yeah. In fact, colonization was about enslaving African people in their own homeland. Nobody can tell me that the Over Herero and Nama people who experienced genocide, people in the Congo who had their limbs and arms cut off, we know that story because it happened to us in plantations in the so-called Americas. But how many of us really know enough and study what happened to specific, and those are some of the more well-known experiences, but that went on across the continent. Okay, it went on across the continent, and it's still going on today in certain places.
Yeah, I think the diamond mines.
Right, Sierra Leone, Liberia, we've seen that kind of practice happen.
Crazy stuff going on down
Yeah, so we need to learn each other's story, journeys. Yeah. We know our own journey, a lot of us, and in fact, some of us don't know too much about our history. but we don't know enough about those that stayed behind and what they encountered.
Yeah, with this modern threat that we're under now, this coming with these jabs and stuff, I'm seeing that the people with lack of knowledge of what we've experienced are some of the ones that's falling into the traps.
Absolutely, because they don't have a sense that the people that are offering these things are the same people that are eugenicists, that have been practicing eugenics for decades and have found ways to perfect it. That is really where we're at. And so that's why we need the 360-degree vision. Yeah, we can't have partial sight around this. So we have to have all of it, including the foresight, to know that people who are offering us these things, they're not doing it because they like us and they genuinely want to ensure that we're on the planet, because they invest, billions upon billions in not only campaigns that target our psyche and our mind, and negatively project Africa and what is in Africa, so that people just don't think, oh no, I don't want to go there because it's not developed, because they've got a skewed view of what development is. But also in terms of this, and the climate and ecological crisis here is really important, because it's under the guise of a climate and ecological crisis that they're ramping up various depopulation measures, because they're saying, oh, there's too many people on the planet. And because they are not overproducing, in fact, in Europe, there's population in many areas. They're not able to sustain themselves naturally, which is why there's a lot of, promotion of mixing with other groups as well. Okay, because it is about Dr. Francis Quest-Welsing taught us about this fear of genetic annihilation, and it's a very real fear, the fear of a black planet. Okay,
it's real.
And so they are finding any which way, because they've tried so many things, so many plagues and illnesses and disease, and really they're just surprised that so many of us are still here. And in fact, more than just being still here, are reproducing ourselves, despite the fact that we've literally had our limbs cut off.
So much has been done to us, man. And when I myself first have to bring it to myself and what I saw with my own eyes and felt the energy, like for instance in Ghana, and just seeing the amount of children that they've got running around the place, the business flourishing. I'm saying, look, we've been lied to, we've been tricked, man.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a whole.
They invest a lot in propaganda, in the media, in the film industry, literally everything. We're being socially engineered to accept particular norms, a particular reality, particular views of the world, and all based on a manufacturing of consent.
Trickery, man. I was saying we shouldn't be able to get tricked so easily, but the fact is most of us haven't realized that we're being tricked.
Yeah, exactly. You're absolutely right.
Well, I'm hoping that, by doing these sort of things and podcasting and having these conversations go out there, people will start to realize, how deep this thing is. Yeah,
exactly. So, reparations is the word that we're using that describes, a movement of movements, in that its antecedents are all the other movements of our people that have been going on for hundreds of years. So if we think about what some of us refer to as applied reparations, the establishing of the state of Haiti was an act of repair, self-repair, to say, well, we are going to form a nation in the diaspora, that is going to be a multinational or multi-ethnic, from African people who came from all different places. And if you commit to fighting in this liberation struggle, then part of your freedom gains is to become a citizen of this newfound state of Haiti. And we all know the success that was at the time. But then Haiti was severely penalized because global Europe did not ever forget. And that example of us taking back, our sovereignty and recreating it, forming statehood and saying, no, we're going to govern ourselves. That was not permitted to succeed. And they have tried, and as you know, they enforced a kind of indemnity on Haiti. So Haiti was forced to literally pay war compensation damages. Some people would say, use the term reparations, which wasn't repaid until the 1940s. Okay. So you link that then to the underdevelopment we've seen in Haiti and the political unrest and the whole kind of history of having puppet rulers imposed on the Haitian people, through which they have been in centuries rebellion, and we've seen recently what happened in Haiti, most recently with the assassination of the head of government. Yes,
because I was under the impression that he was also put there by the Americans, so it seems like
absolutely, and that's part of it. Yeah. Because this is the domination. So Haitian people have, just like a lot of our people, have never really been left free to, even when we're saying, okay, we're not even going to have anything to do with you, we're going to go our own way, thank you very much. Even that they don't want us to do.
But we've seen that with Black Wall Street.
The MOVE bombings in America, and there are other examples of it. Whenever we decide we're going to, take some land and develop our industry and everything on it and grow our own food, you become a threat. And this is just the reality of it.
Yeah. So we're in a situation where it's constantly their attack is constantly evolving.
Constant war. Let's just be very clear, it's war.
And another thing we probably haven't touched on is the incarceration, the prison system.
Yes, absolutely. These are all legacies of what some of us refer to as the Maangamizi, the prison industrial complex, the school to prison pipeline, police brutality, deaths in prison, psychiatric and immigration custody, reproductive and sexual violence, including sterilizations. Extractive industries, austerity measures, land grabs, unemployment and malemployment, racist immigration policies, the whole range of these are all symptoms of a system of structural oppression and domination and subjugation.
And I was going to say there is also new developments happening. Like, for instance, Ghana has coined one year, I think it was last year, the year of return. And we're seeing more organizations trying to form a bridge between Africans on the continent and Africans in the diaspora. Yeah, I'm seeing, a few, what we call it, digital currencies. So we see developments where we're now using our resources and starting to make some headways in certain areas, slowly but surely. Mm-hmm. And we're just like, see how this goes. But I think we're gonna have to wrap up here and definitely have another discussion sometime in the near future.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
It's really good because there's things that you even mentioned that I wasn't even aware of, and I'd like to even explore some of those things. So there's much more to discuss you know.
Always.
And
On reparations, there's always something else to discuss. It's never complete.
Yeah, it's all good. All right.
So thank you for inviting me to be on your show.
You're most welcome.
Much appreciated.
They say in Ghana, akwaba. Yeah.
Akwaba.
All right, so we will speak again soon.
Okay, Madasi.